Rain pattered softly on the tin roof of Rosewood Station, a lonely little building crouched between rolling fields and the endless stretch of railway that vanished into the mountains. Eleanor stood beneath its overhang, her gloved hands gripping the handle of her trunk, the lace hem of her wedding dress brushing the damp planks beneath her boots. The dress, once a symbol of hope and promise, now felt heavy on her shoulders, too white, too bright for a morning so gray. She'd stepped off the train with a heart full of certainty, expecting to see her groom waiting, hat in hand, smile warm, eyes shining with the same affection he'd written in his letters. Instead, she found only emptiness, an open platform, a stray newspaper fluttering in the wind, a handful of strangers rushing past her, eager to return home or greet loved ones. But none of them were him. She waited. At first, she told herself she must have arrived early. Maybe his horse had thrown a shoe. Maybe he'd hit a patch of muddy road. Maybe he was tying a ribbon on flowers meant for her. Dozens of gentle excuses filled her mind, layering themselves like fragile glass to protect her from the sharper possibilities. She stood tall, poised the way her mother had taught her, shoulders back, chin up, dignity always. But as the minutes slipped into an hour, as the train's whistle faded into the distance and the last passenger left the platform, the excuses began to crack. Her breath fogged in the chilly morning air. A wind swept through the station, tugging at the loose strands of hair escaping her pinned curls. She hugged her arms around herself, feeling the cold bite through her thin wedding shawl. Across the tracks, a couple embraced, laughing, spinning, kissing. Nearby, a farmer lifted his daughter into his arms, her giggles ringing through the air as though mocking the silence around Eleanor. No one looked her way anymore. No one wondered why a bride stood alone at a train station, with a trunk and no escort. The station master, a stout man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, paused every so often to look at her with a pity she pretended she didn't see. He cleared his throat once, then twice, but approached her only far enough to offer a bench under the roof's shelter. She thanked him with a polite nod, though her voice trembled, refusing to trust itself. Eleanor sank onto her trunk instead, the wood creaking beneath her as she folded her hands in her lap. She stared out at the tracks, willing any sign of salvation, a rider on horseback, a man calling her name, even a telegram boy to hand her a message with an explanation. But no one came. Had he changed his mind? Had something terrible happened? Had she been tricked, fooled by sweet words penned by a man she had never met? Each question dug deeper into her heart, twisting and churning until her stomach felt hollow. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to breathe, forcing herself not to cry in front of strangers. She had given up everything to come here. Her home, her security, her future. She had traveled across 3 states to become someone's wife, someone's partner, someone's new beginning. And now she sat alone, abandoned before her life with him even had a chance to start. The rain intensified for a moment, drumming against the roof as though echoing the thud of her anxious heart. Eleanor lowered her head, letting her eyes fall closed. The sound of the storm was almost soothing, a reminder that nature didn't care about broken promises. It would rain whether she was heartbroken or not. A soft whimper pierced the steady rhythm of the rainfall. At first she thought it came from the stray dog that had wandered onto the platform earlier, a skinny thing with uneven patches of fur. It lay curled near one of the station benches, watching her with sympathetic eyes, as though it understood abandonment far too well. But the sound came again, sharper this time and from a different direction. Eleanor lifted her head. Small footsteps slapped against the wet wooden planks. Quick, frantic, desperate. She blinked through the fog of her thoughts, focusing on the tiny figure racing toward her from the far end of the platform. A little boy. His hair stuck to his forehead in damp curls, his cheeks flushed from the cold or from running. His coat was too thin for the weather, one button missing, the collar frayed. Mud stained his boots and his small hands trembled with every step he took. He was looking straight at her. Eleanor straightened, confusion flickering through her exhaustion. She glanced around, expecting a frantic parent chasing behind him. But the boy was alone, and the way he clutched his chest as he ran made something in her own chest tighten. He skidded to a stop right in front of her, breath hitching loudly, little shoulders heaving. For a moment, neither spoke. Rain dripped from the station roof behind him, forming small puddles that rippled with each drop. The world felt unusually still, as though everything had paused to watch this tiny stranger gasp for air. Then he lifted his eyes. Blue eyes, startlingly blue, full of hope and fear and desperate longing. Eleanor felt the breath catch in her throat. He opened his mouth, but his voice broke into a whisper, barely audible over the rain. "Mama?" The single word shattered her like glass. She blinked, caught entirely off guard. Her hands hovered in the air as if she wanted to comfort him, but didn't know whether she should. "Sweetheart, Before she could finish, he took a trembling step forward and threw his arms around her waist. The force of the hug nearly toppled her, but she steadied herself, instinctively placing a hand on his back. His small body shook against hers, shook with relief, with fear, with something she didn't yet understand. He clung to her skirt, like a child who had finally found the person he'd been searching for, the only person who could make the world right again. Eleanor froze, breathless, overwhelmed. She didn't know this child, but the way he held her, the way his tiny fingers dug into the fabric of her dress as though terrified she might disappear, ignited a warmth inside her chest that banished every cold. Thought she'd battled all morning. He whispered again, voice muffled against her. "Mama, you came." And Eleanor, a bride abandoned at a train station moments before, felt something she hadn't felt since she arrived. She wasn't alone anymore. Eleanor knelt slowly, letting the wet fabric of her dress gather around her as she gently lifted the little boy's chin. His cheeks were pink from the cold and streaked from tears, fresh and dried, both leaving faint lines across his skin. His lip trembled, though he tried to hide it by pressing it tight between his teeth. He looked at her with a raw kind of hope, the sort that came only from someone who had lost too much too soon. His small fingers didn't loosen their desperate grip on her hand. "Sweetheart," she whispered, her voice soft, careful, almost afraid to break the fragile moment. "I think you've mistaken me for—" "No," he insisted, shaking his head with a sudden fierce certainty that startled her. "You are my mama. Papa said you'd come today. He said you'd come on the morning train. In a white dress." Eleanor's breath hitched. The cold wind around them suddenly felt sharper, as though it carried a warning. A white dress. The morning train. The same details she had been given. Her heart thudded, confused, uneasy. But before she could ask him more, a shadow fell over them. The station master hurried across the platform, his boots making quick, anxious clacks on the wet boards. His spectacles were fogged slightly from the rain, and he dabbed them with a handkerchief as he approached. His eyes flicked from Eleanor to the boy, then back again, and he exhaled with visible relief. "There you are, Miss Eleanor," he said, lowering his voice so others on the platform wouldn't overhear. "Thank heavens I found you. I was searching all over." He shot a sympathetic glance toward the child clinging to her skirt. "And you, Tommy, your papa's been beside himself." The boy didn't move. If anything, he clung harder. Eleanor looked from the child to the station master, her confusion growing heavier by the second. "What is going on?" she asked quietly. The station master sighed, slipping his hat off and holding it against his chest, as though bracing himself to deliver unpleasant news. "There's been a bit of a mix-up." "A mix-up?" Eleanor repeated, the words tasting bitter. She had been waiting for hours. Abandoned or forgotten, it hardly mattered which. And now there was a child calling, her mother, and clinging to her like she was the answer to his every prayer. Nothing about this day had gone the way it was meant to. The station master cleared his throat. "Your groom, Mr. Hale, sent a telegram that he'd be late. You must have missed it while you were waiting on the platform." He nodded to Tommy. As for the boy, his father told him that his new mama would arrive on this morning's train. "Tommy's been waiting just as long as you have." Eleanor felt her heart twist painfully and deeply. She looked down at Tommy, his blue eyes brimmed with tears that threatened to spill at any moment, but he blinked them back defiantly, unwilling to show fear. "You came," he whispered again, softer this time, as though the words were a fragile wish he was afraid would break if spoken too loudly. Eleanor swallowed hard. She should correct him. She should gently tell him that she wasn't the woman he thought she was. But she couldn't. Not when he held on to her with such fierce desperation, as though she was the only safe place left in his small world. Not when the warmth of his tiny hand in hers made something inside her soften in a way she hadn't expected. A voice suddenly echoed across the station. "Tommy!" It boomed with worry, strength, and relief all tangled together. Eleanor turned toward the sound. A tall rancher strode rapidly toward them from the far end of the platform. His coat was soaked from riding in the rain, darkening the fabric so thoroughly it clung to him. His hat dripped water. Mud splashed up his boots, and his breath came in heavy bursts, as though he had been searching everywhere, every platform, every street, every building for his missing child. But what struck Eleanor most was his eyes. When they met hers, he stopped dead in his tracks. It was as if the world paused with him. The rain continued to fall, but quieter somehow. The sound of passing wagons on the street beyond faded into the background. All that remained was the stunned silence stretching between Eleanor and the rugged man who stood frozen several paces away. He stared at her, not in confusion, not in discomfort, but with something closer to disbelief, recognition even, as though he had been searching for her long before this moment. "You," he murmured. Just that one word, heavy, loaded, unspoken questions tangled within it. Tommy turned and for the first time let go of Eleanor's skirt. "Papa," he gasped, running toward the man. The rancher dropped to one knee, gathering the boy into his arms, with such fierce relief that the sight of it pulled at Eleanor's chest. He pressed a kiss to Tommy's damp hair, murmuring something she couldn't hear, something that made the boy nod and cling to him tightly. Eleanor rose slowly, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. She didn't know whether to step forward or stay where she was. She didn't know where she belonged in this strange, tangled moment. When the rancher finally lifted his head again, his gaze met hers with a different intensity. He stood, Tommy perched on his hip, one arm wrapped securely around the child. He hesitated, then took a few steps toward her. "Miss," he began, his voice deep, steady, respectful. "I think there's been a misunderstanding, and maybe not just one." Eleanor forced herself to meet his eyes. They were the same shade of blue as Tommy's, piercing, honest, carrying old grief and new hope. "Your boy thought I was his mother," she said quietly. "I know," the rancher replied with a slow nod. His jaw flexed as though he was fighting his own emotions. "He's been waiting a long time." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to confuse him." He shook his head. "You didn't." He glanced at Tommy, who rested his head tiredly on his father's shoulder. "He saw your dress, the train, the way you looked lost. I suppose he put everything together in his mind and thought." He swallowed. "He thought you were meant for us." Us. The word struck her more deeply than she expected. Eleanor looked at the pair of them, father and son, and something inside her shifted. She had come here to begin a new life with a stranger. She had arrived to find that stranger absent and herself unwanted. Yet here stood another man, another stranger. But instead of abandoning her, he was studying her as if fate itself had placed her in front of him. And instead of recoiling from her, a little boy had run into her arms with absolute trust. Her world had tilted that morning. Now it seemed to tilt again, strange, terrifying, but somehow less lonely. Perhaps she had been left at the station, or perhaps she had been guided right where she was meant to be.